In every fight throughout history, whether on a battlefield, in a boardroom, inside a home, or in the quiet conflicts of the mind, the person who inspires the deepest fear is rarely the loudest, nor the strongest, nor the one who approaches with blazing fury and explosive displays of confidence. Instead, the most dangerous opponent is almost always the one who stands in complete silence, the one whose mind is still, while everyone else is being consumed by noise, agitation, adrenaline, and emotional chaos. Because silence in a moment of conflict is not weakness, but absolute power. This truth was discovered and mastered by one of the greatest warriors to ever walk this earth, a samurai whose name became legend not because of physical dominance alone, but because of the terrifying calm he carried into battle. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, perhaps the greatest swordsman in the history of Japan, a man who stepped into more than 60 life-or-death duels and never once tasted defeat. And these were not training fights or friendly exhibitions, but deadly clashes, where losing meant not a scar, not embarrassment, but immediate death. And yet, despite the brutality of his era and the sharpness of the blades he faced, Musashi's greatest weapon was not the sword he carried, but the mind that guided it. He understood something that most people today still fail to realize, that the moment you lose control of your inner state, the moment your emotions grab the steering wheel, you have already lost before the fight even begins. Musashi's enemies would enter duels trembling with anxiety, clouded by fury, suffocating under the weight of fear, while Musashi himself stood as calm as a still pond, observing, measuring, thinking, and waiting. That mental advantage created a psychological imbalance so profound that many opponents were defeated internally before a single strike was thrown. And what makes this even more remarkable is that the same psychological principles that allowed Musashi to dominate on the battlefield apply perfectly to modern life today, where the weapons have changed but the stakes remain high. Whether you are facing an aggressive boss at work, arguing with a partner, confronted with provocation online, or simply dealing with the pressure and noise of everyday interactions, one truth becomes clear. The person who controls the mind controls the outcome. Musashi mastered 4 internal strategies that allowed him to stay centered even when the world around him was collapsing into chaos. And the first of these principles is something that almost every human being struggles with in daily life: emotional distance. Think about what happens when someone yells at you, challenges you, humiliates you, or tries to provoke you. Instantly, the body reacts. Your muscles tighten, your heart begins to pound, your back stiffens, and your emotional temperature rises. Anger builds like a storm, and before you realize it, your mouth speaks faster than your mind can filter, and suddenly you are not responding to the situation, but reacting blindly, swept away by an emotional wave that now controls you. This is the trap Musashi understood better than anyone. He knew that the person who becomes a prisoner of their emotions loses 2 essential things: control of the situation, and even more importantly, control of themselves. That is why his first principle had nothing to do with the strength of the body, but with the discipline of the mind. Emotional distance, as Musashi practiced it, is the ability to separate yourself from what you are feeling and observe your inner reactions without becoming enslaved by them. He described it as imagining yourself floating above the battlefield, watching events unfold without getting dragged into them. He did not become anger, he noticed anger. He did not become fear. He saw fear pass through him like a cloud drifting across the sky. And this single shift, refusing to merge your identity with the emotion, is enough to change everything. Yet most people fall into the same psychological trap every day.
When someone causes hostility or insults them, they immediately respond with the words, "I am angry." In that moment, they stop recognizing anger as a temporary experience and instead take it on as part of their identity. The anger now speaks, decides, and acts on their behalf. They are no longer choosing, they are being controlled. Musashi refused to fall into that psychological trap. Instead, he would mentally say, "I am feeling anger right now." A small but crucial shift that creates a space between the self and the emotion. And in that space lies your power. Because only when you create that separation can you choose your next move with clarity instead of temporary emotional impulse. So how can we apply this in modern life? The next time someone provokes you verbally, tries to embarrass you in public, flares up at home, challenges you online, or pulls you into an emotional tug-of-war, pause. Not for a long time, even 1 or 2 seconds is enough, and mentally say, "I notice that I am feeling angry," or "I notice that I am feeling triggered." When you label the emotion instead of becoming it, the brain shifts from the emotional center, the amygdala, to the rational center, the prefrontal cortex, allowing you to respond consciously instead of reflexively. You do not deny the emotion, suppress it, or pretend to be unaffected. You simply choose not to let it ride you like a horse. And once emotional distance settles in, an enormous internal shift occurs. The storm begins to lose its power, clarity returns, and you reclaim control. Musashi never entered a confrontation just hoping things would turn out well. He prepared his mind before every duel. And that leads to his second principle, anticipatory awareness. Most people step into arguments, negotiations, confrontations, and difficult conversations without mentally preparing, and as a result, they react in the moment rather than respond with foresight. But Musashi believed that calmness requires knowledge of what is likely to happen before it happens. He trained himself to detect patterns, because human beings, especially under pressure, behave predictably. Anger narrows focus. Fear causes hesitation. Impatience exposes weakness. Before facing opponents, Musashi watched them closely, analyzing the way they moved, the strikes they relied on, how they reacted to stress, the tempo of their attacks, their emotional vulnerabilities, and even their vanity. That is why in his famous duel with Sasaki Kojiro, Musashi intentionally arrived late, knowing Kojiro was impatient and proud. By the time Kojiro saw Musashi appear with a last-minute carved wooden sword slightly longer than his own blade, Kojiro was already mentally defeated. Musashi had won before the fight even started. In modern life, this same principle is profound. Before entering a tense conversation, take 30 seconds to ask yourself, what emotional state is this person likely in? What do they truly want from this exchange? What are the 3 most predictable reactions they might have? When the brain predicts what may occur, you reduce surprise, which is the trigger for panic and emotional overwhelm. Even modern FBI hostage negotiators use the same principle. They analyze emotional profiles, previous behaviors, and likely outcomes before the negotiation begins, so that when the conversation starts, their mind is already prepared and steady, while the other side is drowning in uncertainty. When you know the emotional terrain before you step onto it, conflict becomes less frightening and much easier to navigate. The third principle Musashi used was mastery over breathing, because he knew that the breath is the bridge between the body and the mind. When people feel anger, fear, or anxiety, the first thing that changes is their breathing. It becomes short, shallow, and rapid, sending a biological signal of danger that clouds judgment and escalates emotional response.
Musashi trained himself to take controlled, slow breaths even in the middle of combat. He understood that if he could control his breathing, he could control his emotional state. And if he could control his emotional state, he could control the outcome. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural calming mechanism, and can shift the person from fight-or-flight panic into clarity in just a few seconds. Musashi would take one conscious breath before engaging, inhaling through the nose for 4 seconds, holding briefly, then exhaling through the mouth for 6 seconds. This simple cycle reset his internal system and gave his mind clarity while his opponents were trapped in their emotional hurricane. Anyone can use this today. Before responding in a heated argument, before replying to an aggressive message, before speaking in a meeting, before confronting someone, take one strategic breath. It gives your mind the space to choose instead of react. Finally, Musashi believed that no action should be taken without a clear purpose. Most people fight simply to defend their ego or prove that they are right. But Musashi only acted with intention. He would ask himself, what is my true objective here? This prevented him from being dragged into meaningless emotional battles. In modern conflicts, arguments often start with a valid reason but quickly dissolve into accusations, old hurts, personal attacks, and emotional chaos. That happens because the purpose becomes forgotten. Before any confrontation, ask yourself, what is my real goal? To find a solution without causing damage? To defend my boundaries without disrespecting others? To protect my peace? Then, when emotions rise, silently remind yourself of that purpose. It becomes an anchor that keeps you steady in the storm. It also allows you to recognize when a battle is not worth fighting at all. Because true power is not in fighting every conflict. It is in knowing which conflicts do not deserve your energy. Musashi understood that mastery in combat was never about defeating the opponent, but mastering oneself. His 4 principles, emotional distance, anticipatory awareness, strategic breathing, and purposeful action are not merely strategies for warriors. They are blueprints for a conscious life in a chaotic world. And today, with social media flare-ups, workplace pressure, relationship conflicts, and the constant demand to react quickly, the person who remains calm while others lose control is the one who truly holds power. When you begin mastering yourself, something incredible happens. Many conflicts evaporate because they existed not in the world, but within your own emotional reactions. And the moment you change internally, the world you experience changes with you. This is not the path of brute force, but of inner strength. True control does not come from overpowering others. It comes from awareness. And once you learn this, like Musashi, you stop merely fighting battles and begin transcending them.
Most people believe that the most dangerous person in a confrontation is the one with the strongest body, the largest muscles, the most intimidating presence, or the loudest voice. But history proves otherwise, because again and again, in real battles and in the silent struggles of ordinary life, the individual who inspires the greatest fear is the one who walks into the conflict with absolute calmness, without raising his voice, without posturing, without trembling, and without allowing emotions to shake the steady center of his mind. This truth was lived to perfection by one of the greatest warriors the world has ever known, a Japanese swordsman whose legend continues to echo across centuries, Miyamoto Musashi. In an age where duels were not symbolic victories, but life-or-death clashes, Musashi stepped forward more than 60 times to face armed opponents, and not once did he fall. His record remains unmatched in the annals of swordsmanship, And yet his dominance did not come from brute strength or from dazzling sword strikes alone. What made him unstoppable was the inner discipline that allowed him to walk into a duel with total mental control, while his opponents were swallowed by panic. Musashi had discovered a principle that has only recently been validated by neuroscience and psychology. When two people enter a conflict, the one with emotional control has already won before the first move is made. His opponents were beaten by their own minds. Their hands shook, adrenaline clouded their judgment, their hearts raced, and fear or anger hijacked their rational thinking. Musashi, on the other hand, stood with the composed stillness of a mountain. His eyes were clear, his breathing steady, and his thoughts precise. He understood that swordsmanship was not primarily a physical battle, it was an internal war with oneself. If a person cannot dominate themselves, they can never dominate the situation before them. And this is where Musashi's teachings become more relevant today than ever, because although most of us will never face a battlefield with swords, we face conflicts constantly. A bitter argument with a colleague, a heated exchange with a spouse, online provocations, family tension, political debates, misunderstandings at work, or messages that trigger strong emotional reactions. The weapons have changed, but the psychology remains the same. Whoever controls the mind controls the outcome. Musashi developed 4 internal principles that allowed him to remain centered, no matter how turbulent the situation became. And each of these principles can be applied instantly in modern life. The first principle is emotional detachment, the ability to witness your emotional reactions without being consumed by them. When someone attacks you verbally, insults you, challenges your dignity, or pushes your buttons, the body immediately launches into an automatic biological response. Muscles contract, blood pressure rises, adrenaline fires, the heart accelerates, and the prefrontal cortex, the rational decision-making center, begins shutting down as the emotional brain takes over. Most people start reacting from this storm. They say things they later regret, lash out impulsively, escalate the argument, or lose control of their voice, tone, reasoning, and composure. Musashi studied this phenomenon deeply. He realized that if he reacted emotionally the moment the duel began, he had already given his opponent power. So he cultivated the ability to observe emotions as temporary weather patterns passing through the sky of the mind. He did not suppress anger, he acknowledged it. He did not ignore fear, he recognized it. But he refused to merge with these emotions. He did not say, "I am angry," but "I am experiencing anger." This tiny linguistic shift creates psychological space, and in that space exists the power to choose action instead of reacting blindly. Many spiritual traditions echo this same truth. Buddhism calls it non-identification. Stoicism calls it mastery of passions, and modern psychology calls it cognitive diffusion. But Musashi didn't just understand it intellectually, he lived it in the middle of life or death duels. And once a person learns this skill, everyday arguments, insults, disagreements, and provocations lose the ability to hijack the mind. The second principle Musashi mastered was anticipatory awareness, the art of knowing what may happen before it happens. Unlike most people, who walk into difficult conversations without preparation and then react based on surprise, Musashi trained himself to recognize patterns. Humans are predictable when under emotional pressure. The impatient move before thinking, the fearful hesitate, the arrogant overextend, and the angry lose precision. Before facing an opponent, Musashi would study him, the rhythm of his footwork, the stance he preferred, the breathing he used when tense, the weapon he relied on, and even the emotional weaknesses he displayed unconsciously. This allowed Musashi to begin the duel already holding the advantage. Because when he walked into the scene, he was not shocked by what unfolded. He had prepared his nervous system for it. Modern professionals like crisis negotiators, elite athletes, high-level debaters, and military strategists use the same principle. If you walk into a difficult conversation without expecting pushback, anger, emotion, or resistance, you are likely to react impulsively. But if you take 30 seconds beforehand to ask 3 simple questions: what emotional state is this person probably in? What do they want out of this interaction? And what reactions are most likely to emerge? You engage the rational brain before the emotional brain takes over. When the event begins, the mind is not startled, but ready. And readiness is calmness. The third principle Musashi wielded was mastery over breath. In ancient Japan, he discovered a psychological secret that science now confirms in hundreds of studies. Breathing controls the nervous system. When emotions rise, breathing becomes fast and shallow, signaling the brain that the situation is dangerous, which increases cortisol, adrenaline, racing thoughts, and physical tension. Musashi trained himself to reverse this. In moments of highest pressure, he took slow, deep, elongated breaths. Inhale through the nose for 4 seconds, brief pause, exhale through the mouth for 6 seconds. This slows the heart rate, activates the parasympathetic system, and reopens clarity of thinking. Even one such breath can shift a person from fight or flight panic to calm presence. Today, therapists use this method for anxiety. Athletes use it before critical plays. Soldiers use it in combat training. And negotiators use it to reset the mind during confrontation. If you try this during an argument, a heated comment thread, or a stressful meeting, you will feel the weight of emotion lighten almost immediately. Because when breathing slows down, the body follows, and when the body calms, the mind becomes clear. The fourth principle Musashi lived by was purposeful action. Most people enter conflicts driven by ego, wanting to prove they are right, defend pride, win the argument, or make the other person retreat. But Musashi believed that action without purpose is the same as walking into a battlefield blindfolded. Before drawing his sword, he asked himself, what is the real aim here? In modern conversations, disputes often start for valid reasons, miscommunication, disagreements, different expectations, but quickly spiral into personal attacks, triggering emotional history, or bringing up past wounds. Suddenly, the original goal is forgotten, and both sides are now fighting not for resolution, but for dominance. Musashi avoided this entirely by grounding himself in intention. So in everyday life, before entering a difficult conversation, it is powerful to ask, what am I truly trying to achieve? Am I trying to resolve peacefully? Clarify boundaries, communicate a difficult truth respectfully, protect my emotional stability. When emotions rise during the argument, silently repeating the purpose in your mind keeps you aligned with strategic thinking instead of impulse. And here lies the most surprising lesson. Not every battle deserves your energy. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to engage. Musashi understood that the strongest warrior was not the one who could strike hardest, but the one who could see clearly enough to choose when striking was unnecessary. True power lies in transcending the fight altogether, not winning it. These 4 principles, emotional distance, anticipatory awareness, strategic breathing, and purposeful action, formed the internal foundation that allowed Musashi to stand unshaken while opponents around him fell apart mentally before the swords even crossed. But beyond the battlefield, this philosophy offers something valuable to anyone living in the modern world. Today we live in constant psychological combat. Digital arguments, hurried workplaces, stressed households, overstimulated minds, and environments that encourage instant reaction rather than mindful response. People are expected to react immediately. Pausing is seen as weakness. But Musashi's wisdom flips that idea. True warriors pause before they strike. The pause is not hesitation, it is control. And once a person begins cultivating this ability, something profound happens. Many of the conflicts they once fought stop existing, not because the world became calmer, but because their inner experience changed. When the inner war ends, the outer battle no longer demands
participation. This is why Musashi's legacy endures.
not because he defeated 60 opponents, but because he defeated the one enemy every human carries within, the emotional impulses that cloud reason and dictate action. His way was not the way of brute force, but the way of mastery of self. And when a person learns this, they stop being reactive participants in conflict and begin guiding their actions with clarity, restraint, intention, and wisdom. In a world that constantly tries to provoke, rush, push, and overwhelm us, the greatest power a human can possess today is not the ability to shout louder or strike harder, but the ability to remain still when everyone else is losing control. The calm mind becomes the sharpest sword. The aware mind becomes the strongest armor. And the individual who walks into conflict without emotional turbulence becomes someone no opponent can mentally defeat, because their center is anchored not in external circumstances, but in the unshakable depth of self-mastery. In the end, life never promises straight roads, easy paths, or victories without battles. It gives us storms, so we learn to hold on, darkness, so we learn to seek light, and challenges, so we discover who we truly are. From the small room with leaky roofs to a life filled with struggle and uncertain nights, the old woman proved one thing: happiness is never about what we have, but what we choose to feel. Pain taught her strength, loss taught her value, and time taught her the importance of gratitude. And that is the real message of her story. No matter where you come from or how difficult your circumstances may be, you always have the power to choose hope. Life can break you, shape you, and rebuild you all at once. But as long as you keep moving forward, tomorrow will always carry a new possibility. So whenever life challenges you, remember her story and tell yourself, this is not the end. This is just the beginning of a stronger, wiser, and braver you.